Great. So, welcome everybody. It's lovely to have you here today. We are recording this and there is an AI summary, so you can ask the AI to catch you up during the meeting if there's anything you've missed. The plan is we're going to have 45 minutes roughly of ideas and tips on funding, resources and value for money. And then we can have up to 15 minutes questions and answers at the end. But if you want to put questions in the chat as you go along, I'll make sure I've got my chat box up. As they occur to you, don't wait till the end, and I'll try and answer them either as we go through, or if I can't multitask that much, then I'll try and get to them at the end. If you have any sort of questions on the technicalities, technical sides of things, do just ping an email or ping a message in the chat as well. Right, a few introductions. I mean, I know that most of those here on the webinar know me already, but for the recording, just to say a little bit about my background. So after 22 years in the classroom, I was appointed to be a lead on partnerships. And during that time, I founded the Schools Together group, which has now become the School Partnerships Alliance, which is really a group for fostering collaboration between those of us who are working in the field of partnerships. Since 2020, I've been working for myself with my consultancy business and doing work with schools directly, but also training for some of these organisations. And as many of you know, I started up the Partner Chat Network in 2022. We meet every month and for webinars like this, and there's a book and a course. But I also, you may not be so aware that I work with a lot of corporate and charitable clients on their outreach to schools. So I'm based in Canterbury, but my work obviously takes me around the UK and further afield. Anyway, delightful to be with you today. Thanks very much for coming. So the plan is really to talk through these three areas, as I say, in about 45 minutes. And really the reason for putting on this webinar was that I'm very aware that all schools, all sectors, all phases are facing unprecedented budgetary and capacity constraints at the moment. And that's not likely to ease in the short or medium term. But that doesn't mean that the activities that we do in partnership with other schools should be constrained, and especially when they bring such clear benefit for your students, for your staff, for the schools overall. And indeed, many time and savings, cost savings can be found by collaborating with others. So, that's obviously very, very important. For the purposes of this webinar, I'll be assuming that you are familiar with partnerships between schools, whether that's cross-sector within a MAT or other state school groupings, or between secondary and primary schools or whatever. If you're looking for help getting started with partnerships, initiating partnerships, I can help with that too, but it's not really the purpose of this webinar. Just checking that the screen sharing is sharing the right thing. Perhaps somebody could just put a quick message in the chat saying that you can see the PowerPoint slides all right, because Zoom seems to have updated. It doesn't look quite the same as it used to. Brilliant. Thank you, Kat. So we're going to have a look at some smart tips for making your budget go further. None of this will be rocket science, but it's just, I think, sometimes useful to collate it all in one place, and you'll make notes that are relevant to your particular setting. Secondly, we'll look at how important it is to justify those resources, because if you can't do that, you may find that the resources dry up. We've got to be able to show that we're bringing value for money for whatever kind of school we're in. And then thirdly, we'll just look briefly at some creative sources of funding, which you may or may not have thought of, and some support with some of that as well. And when I send out the slides with the recording, I will also make sure that you get the links that go with any of the tips and suggestions that I'm making. Okay, so let's launch straight into some top tips. So we're going to look at these 6 top tips, and let's start with the important area of prioritising. And what I mean by this is prioritising projects that align most closely with your values and ethos as a school. So start from that point of view, because if it doesn't align, then you may be wanting to look at some different sorts of projects. Secondly, make sure that you're prioritising projects that have the most impact on students or school improvement or whatever. And I'll do a bit more on that later when we look at justifying resources. So impact evaluation obviously is central here. And thirdly, prioritise projects that fit within your capacity. It's so tempting just to sort of add more and more and more, but actually you need to be pruning and prioritising to make sure that your resources go further. So whether that's staffing costs or time, budget for expenses, minibus availability, which we know is often very important, all of that sort of thing. So prioritising projects that align with your ethos, have the most impact and fit with your capacity. Now, when I'm working with schools to help them develop their partnership strategy, I recommend starting with an audit of all your collaborative projects, everything that you've kind of ever done in recent memory, and then prioritise those that tick these 3 boxes. And that's a good way to start. Second tip is repurposing existing activities. So rather than putting on special events for your partner schools, try to fit your partnership activities into existing structures in the school week so that it's actually just a marginal cost to you only. So if you think about the co-curricular activities programme that you already have and is already staffed, crucially, if you have workshops going on, visiting speakers, competitions, anything like that, if you're putting on the activity anyway, and you're hiring a coach, maybe booking a speaker and so on, a few more children from another school isn't going to affect the cost and could have a real impact on the event. So take a moment to think about the activities going on in your school just this term, as an example, and ask, be that person that keeps asking, why can't we do this with local partner schools? So classic example, prep school music day, come along and sing. Well, why can't we open that up to our local primaries as well? Sorry, just go back and talk about these pictures. So we've got a DofE expedition. I know that some schools do that jointly with other schools that haven't got the wherewithal perhaps to put on DofE, to become registered as a DofE centre. We've got a talk there. This is a lovely talk from Greg Foote, now made famous through his Radio 4 programme Sliced Bread, coming to give a talk with hundreds of pupils there, really quite a small cost per pupil. And then we've got a chess tournament there going on, which was a number of different schools coming together. Okay, third tip is be smart about your staffing. Now, I should say it's really important not to underestimate the time it takes to build relationships and deal with the admin as a partnerships leader. It's all very well having these wonderful ideas, but those things do take time. However, the burden and therefore the cost can be less if those partnerships are embedded in school life, as I said before. Start by calling on staff who enjoy collaborating, who get that idea, including support staff. And you can also encourage student leadership as well. They can be your free staff, obviously within safeguarding constraints. So we've got some pictures here of a physics technician delivering CPD for other technicians, which is often really, really needed. We've got a picture there of the headmaster's wife and the head of catering, the catering manager, judging a bake-off competition, rather than the hard-pressed head of partnerships doing yet another task. And then you can see there's some sports leaders from an academy, and they were supporting a multi-sport event, which was a collaborative event with several schools, lots of primary schools and a university. So a really multifaceted event. But these sports leaders who've been trained up were absolutely brilliant. You could send them off to help out with any of the activities during the day. And of course, fantastic experience for them. The next one is about sharing facilities or expenses. And I know that quite often when we hear about partnerships in the news, examples are given from where independent schools are sharing facilities with state schools. And for that reason, I've chosen a picture there of that running track, which is actually a state school in North London, an academy, which is lending it actually to an independent school because they just have less space. So it does work both ways. So agreeing to use each other's facilities, pitches, the school hall, minibuses when they're fallow, and then joining together for shared expenses. So it might be equipment testing, PAT testing, for example, pressure vessel testing, which has to be done in the science department, staff CPD, visiting speaker cost. There is real buying power by coming together with other schools and other partners. Other examples on this page, we've got a picture of a boy in a sailing boat owned by an independent school but loaned to a special school. And then the students actually helping out as instructors, which of course brings even more benefit. We've got a screenshot there of an equipment loan scheme where the equipment belongs to one school but is shared out amongst many, and that can be really powerful for science, TT and so on. And then the last picture there, we've got a visiting speaker at a teach meet, and the expenses incurred there are then sort of effectively shared between everybody. Everyone is benefiting. So lots of creative ways of doing this, but I must say it does sometimes need clout at head teacher level or senior leadership level to break through the kind of red tape with this kind of sharing. So there was a discussion recently about minibus permits, or things like, are we going to charge for the cost of the caretaker, or can that be swallowed in some way? So it does sometimes take somebody of fairly high seniority to agree to some of these kinds of sharings. Then we've got the use of external organisations, and this is something that I think we're all becoming more and more aware of, that there are a lot of organisations out there that are desperate to reach schools. And if you've got a partnership in your local area with other schools, maybe other sectors, maybe other phases, whatever, you will find that these organisations are really keen to engage with you all and help out. They've got their KPIs, their key performance indicators that they have to meet. And having worked as a trustee on a couple of charities, I know that how true this is. So I'm talking about charities, it might be local cultural organisations, civic organisations, and the way that they can support your partnership can be manifold. It could be about adding capacity. It might be staffing or minibuses. It might be free resources. It might even be funding. So check out your local museums, art galleries, universities, educational charities, and that kind of triangulation when you've got your partnership between two schools maybe, and then this third organisation can not only support your partnership, but can actually leverage engagement. If you're finding that a school is unwilling really to engage with you, putting the heat, taking the heat away from you and putting it onto a different organisation can sometimes just make it a little bit easier to engage. So just let me talk through some of these pictures. You can see in the top right there, a lovely project embellishing deck chairs. And this was a joint project between, funded by a local charitable trust, a family charity trust, an art gallery, this was the Turner Contemporary in Margate, and then a partnership of independent schools and state schools. And the funding helped not only to pay for the deck chairs, but also transport and an artist in residence to lead the project. You can see here some students gathered around a Van de Graaff generator, the classic physics image. That's from the Ogden Trust, who set up partnerships with schools and then support them with training. And there's also physics partners, you can see the logo there, that do similar work, especially on the teacher training side. We've got Expert Ed, which is really a partnership of partnerships driven by one school, Oundle School, and they are offering free talks online. So, the numbers accessing that could be endless. And those are often science experts, key figures, but they also do some midweek maths, lots of different projects going on. So do have a look at Expert Ed. Future First is a charity that helps state schools to engage with their alumni. And there's definitely an opportunity there for state and independent schools to work together to help each other access different types of alumni, different kinds of jobs and careers that they've gone into, and with different amounts of expertise. And Wallow, the World of Languages, Languages of the World, that's a lovely project to do with languages, a very creative way of teaching languages. And then the one at the top left there is the Gabriele Raw project, which you may have come across. This is a music project that gets children singing together. And again, they want to work with a school that can act as a kind of hub, but then that's facilitating this engagement with lots and lots of other schools as well. Thinking of external organisations that might facilitate partnerships, don't ignore your own parents. They too can contribute maybe time, expertise, or useful connections. And my final smart tip, top tip for this afternoon is really looking for external funding. And I'll talk a bit more about this towards the end of our session. You could approach local businesses to support your event. Your partnership might be helping with a coach to get to the event, because we know that transport can sometimes really be a barrier to accessing projects. Might be about sponsoring refreshments or t-shirts, as you can see in this image here. Again, ask parents and alumni if that's appropriate at your school. It isn't at everyone. And you can also, of course, consider applying to trusts and foundations, and I'll say more on that later. But I have put here a mention of the HMCK charity because it's unique in that it funds cross-sector partnerships. So if that's your style of partnership, then do have a look at HMCK. And unlike many grants and foundations, they are willing to fund independent schools with a cross-sector project or state schools. And the bottom picture there is a wonderful award ceremony. This is an award won by Beaumont Collegiate Academy, who worked with United Utilities, fantastic real-life engineering project. They won a STEM award, and that helps to leverage future funding, because a funder will often want to see some evidence of kind of proven success. It makes it much more of an attractive deal. So competitions, awards can really bring in funds, or at least raise visibility, because you can imagine the promotional content that provided was fantastic. I'll just pause there to draw breath, have a glass of water, but just to say that if you have got any questions and you want to pop them in the chat before you forget, please do. We'll have questions at the end. Okay, let's go on to the second part now. This is justifying resources. So you'll probably need to justify the resources needed for your partnerships. You might need to do that for your senior leadership team, for your governors. If you've got external funders, they will undoubtedly want to see what you're doing with the money and what impact you're making. And in some cases, if you're in an independent school, if you're spending fee income on partnerships, then you might need to justify what you're doing to parents, current parents. Now, even if your activities fall within a kind of normal departmental budget, I mentioned earlier, embedding your partnerships in existing activities or everyday expenses for your school. For example, you might have a year 6 transition day. You may still need to protect that when budgets become strained. So this is very important. And you might need to explain why partnerships are a gain, not a drain. Feel free to pinch that on resources and time. And it's important to kind of build a bit of a story around this for your internal stakeholders, communication with them, and possibly external stakeholders, whether that's through websites, newsletters to your alumni or your prospective parents or whatever. So a few things that you might like to consider to include in this story. First of all, that Partnerships are part of our students' education. We think they're important. We think that partnerships help their personal development of their life skills, their confidence, their resilience, etc. Life skills, employment skills, soft skills, whatever you like to call them. Secondly, you might consider that it's impossible to fulfill your school ethos, your values, your mission statement, without your students going beyond the school walls and interacting with a wider community. Many schools, I think, would recognise that. Thirdly, partnerships do bring unique experiences for our students, including meeting a much more diverse range of people. Whatever school you are, there will inevitably be more diversity by meeting others from other schools, developing empathy, developing social understanding. And these are such crucial qualities that we want to develop in our students in their character before they leave our care. Fourthly, many partnership projects, especially those that are based in the community, foster a real sense of well-being. Thinking of some gardening projects, that sailing project, swimming, lots of things where we're getting together can really enhance well-being, and especially where there's a volunteering element to it. There have been research studies showing that link. And real stress relief, whether that's for students or staff. And finally on my list, you may have more, of course, staff benefit. It's not just about the students here. Our staff benefit, it might be professional development, it might be just some new ideas about data and reporting or behaviour management. But they also might feel more connected locally and professionally to a network of support in a local professional community. And the school as a whole benefits from partnerships, school improvement, school reputation. And no school wants to be known as the bubble, with the closed gates, that doesn't want to interact with the wider community. So these are all things that you might like to consider when you're telling your story about how important partnerships are. If you have to defend yourself, justify yourself. And I want to move on now to why evaluating impact is a very important part of this. So impact evaluation really has three main purposes. And the first is what I've just been talking about, justifying your resources, your expenses, your staff time against the benefit. Return on investment, if you like. It's a rather corporate term to use. But you might get a question from the governors. Why are you spending X £1,000 on this project? Or how can we justify the head of partnership's salary or the staff member that's responsible for this project? If you're an external funder, or parent fees, as I said before. But that's not the only reason for evaluating impact. It also enables you to communicate to all your stakeholders what you're doing, and your partners, of course, what you're doing and the benefit that it's having. And then that becomes part of what the school is known for. And thirdly, this one is sometimes neglected. It's about steering the direction of the partnership activities. It might be that you discover through your impact measurement that pupil premium children seem to benefit more than the rest of the cohort. So perhaps you might want to prioritise those next year, or girls rather than boys, or whatever it is. You might find that some activities are more successful than others, so you prioritise those and maybe do a bit less of the other stuff next year. It's important to keep pruning as you expand as well. So impact evaluation. The main thing that I think is important to think about with impact evaluation, and lots of us are doing it now, which is brilliant, but I would love to see more of a focus on outcomes over outputs. So this is the one thing that will really help, not only with justifying the funding that's already happened, but applying for future funding. And it's focusing on outcomes rather than outputs. So, it's relatively easy to measure, 125 children came for swimming lessons in our pool last year. That's great. We're sharing the swimming pool. Lots of people are involved. But it's not that difficult to drill down a little bit further and turn that into outcomes. 73% learned to swim 25 metres. 34 of them overcame their fear of water, or 67% reported greater resilience. And yes, it is possible to measure those things. A couple of other examples there, which you can have a look at. And you might like to think about one of your current or planned projects with another school. And rather than counting how many people were involved or the number of hours of the activity, can you think of just 2 or 3 really simple outcomes which you were aiming for and which might be measurable? This might be an induction day with a feeder school, year 6 to year 7 transition. Actually, how much is that, the activities you choose to do on that day, how much of an impact is that having on their confidence coming into the big school? One thing to be clear about, and this I've borrowed from John Smith at RGS in Newcastle, is that your outcomes need to be feasible, plausible, and testable. So I like those 3: feasible, plausible, and testable. Another 4 principles of data collection. These come from Becky Allen's report on, this was actually on teacher workload. And we're collecting data left, right, and centre on pupils, and actually how useful is all that data. So her 4 principles, which I love, are that the data should be useful, that's to you. It should be credible to others, large enough sample size, that kind of thing. It should be robust, which means that you're collecting meaningful data and you are respecting privacy, GDPR, and all the rest of it. And finally, that the process of collecting the data should be proportionate to the resources allocated. It's nothing worse than collecting 200 A4 sheets of paper after an event and then somehow finding the time to wade through it all. So keep it proportionate to the resources you've got. So that's quite a good set of principles, I think, to go by. How do we capture data? Oh gosh, there are so many different ways of doing it. Some on this table here are very involved. Some are much, much simpler. Just don't make it so complex that you can't either collect it or analyze it when you've got it. And of course, a lovely longitudinal survey would be far more statistically significant than a one-off event. But that's not always possible if you've got different people involved in different projects. It is sometimes possible to compare with national cohort metrics. Sometimes you have to do paid for questionnaires with that. That's very, very good for those soft skills I mentioned before, things like resilience, self-efficacy, motivation. But if you can at least get a simple before and after, if it is a one-off event, and make it quick, because you don't want it to take out time from the actual activity itself. Help is at hand. There are various organisations that will help with measuring impact, including Impact Ed, which you may have heard of. But also think about your own, closer to home, your own statistics teachers or people who have been trained in the social sciences might be really good at this. If you're paired with a university, they might have researchers or interns that would be willing to help with that. A few examples of some of the ways that you could collect data. Even the simple post-it note can give you some fantastic qualitative feedback. The picture in the middle shows a university student working with a group of children and doing a group evaluation. Hands up who thought this was really, really good, hands up who thought it could have been better, that kind of thing. For young children, we need to think about easy smiley faces or those kind of airport style push button evaluation boxes. Nice DT project for your year 9s maybe. And here's also an example of a questionnaire for students. And it's really great if you can have the same questions for each project that you run at the top, with a sort of scale, Likert scale type questions, and then something which is peculiar to that event, so that you can get a little bit more nuanced feedback to help you with that steering next year. But having the same questions for everything means that you can collate everything together. It's not always possible. And don't forget that qualitative or anecdotal feedback can be every bit as powerful, in fact, even more powerful, really important part of the narrative to feed back to everyone involved. and for those concerned with funding. And your marketing people, if you're lucky enough to have such a function in your school, love this kind of thing. So we've got feedback here from a partner school, we've got feedback here from partner parents. Something there in an ISI report, and Ofsted too are very interested in looking at how you're using your partnerships to bring in that school improvement. And then, of course, quotes like this from the children involved. This is the day I became a scientist. Well, that says it all, doesn't it? And that's what gets us out of bed in the morning. Okay, final section this afternoon is on sources of funding. I said I would come back to this a little bit more on external sources of funding. So local corporate sponsorship can be really powerful. And if you've got contractors who've worked with you and you've got a relationship with them, there are lots of people there that you might be able to ask, even at just a small amount of money or a little bit of benefit in kind, a lift, minibus, signage, whatever it is. Here you can see a sort of exemplar letter or information sheet that you might send to a potential sponsor. And it's just by way of showing some of the important stuff that needs to go into it. Title, introduction, include your aims, make that really clear. Bit of information about the event. Will they be able to come to the event, maybe? And an idea of how much the whole thing's going to cost, and what the benefit will be. And then some pictures often helps to illustrate what's going on if you've done this event before, for example. And then you might want to invite them to the event, in which case afterwards you might send pictures or include pictures. But if you do ask for corporate sponsorship, be sure to explain what those anticipated benefits will be beforehand. And if they align with that corporate funder's own ethos and values, they're much more likely to come on board. And talk about the actual impact that you measured as soon as possible afterwards. Invite them if it's possible, acknowledge their support appropriately. You saw earlier the logos on the boys' t-shirt, photos for the press and all of that, and remember to thank them. Now, I know all of this, it sounds very obvious, but for those of us who've come from a teaching background, not a development background or fundraising background, it's new, so it is worth thinking about. And of course, if you do have a development team at your school, they will help you, I'm sure, or a partner school. Now, applying to trusts and foundations is like the next level, and it does take a lot of time and planning. And if, as I said, if you do have a development office at your school, it's a big professional sort of piece of work. However, there is help at hand from the Institute for Development Professionals in Education, the IDPE, and I've done a little bit of work with them on sort of preparing some of these thoughts for today. They have a resource toolkit which is free on their website. Some of your schools may be members and have access to more, but this State School Toolkit, as it's called, is available to everybody freely. And it's got some brilliant ideas on fundraising, how to get started, and what kind of things to think about if this is something which is a bit new to you. But do reach out to others for help. There might be parents or alumni with fundraising experience. Again, universities, charities, and so on. Fundraising from external trusts and foundations is time consuming. You often have long forms to fill in, and it's much harder for independent schools. There are not that many out there that will fund independent schools, even if the actual benefit is to be shared with others. So if you're in a partnership, maybe ask the state school to apply. You can help them, of course, to develop the text that's going into it, or a third party. The charity HMCK, which I mentioned before, is an exception because they are sector neutral, shall we say, which is great. So coming to the end of what I have to say, and gosh, I'm ahead of time, that's unusual. This resource summarises in one page everything that I've talked about this afternoon. It's one of a series of different toolkits. So this is funding resources. There's one on impact evaluation. There's one on getting started. There's one on doing a kind of partnerships strategy audit, and a whole load of other things. You just need to head over to the Partner Chat membership hub on the Aston Consulting website for that. But they're all one pages. And, you know, if you're building up your practice as a head of partnerships, and that might be a good way to start. If you want something a bit more involved, then, oh, sorry, I did want to just say a big thanks to two people who sense checked this for me, and I made a few little tweaks as a result. One was Chris Hillage, to make sure that I was getting, you know, my independent state sector messaging as balanced as possible, and Graham Laurie, who's done loads of this before. So thank you to them very much for their help. And yes, if you are looking for something that's a little bit more in-depth on leading partnerships, our New to Partnerships course is running again for this year. So we've got a cohort starting next week on Tuesday. It's not too late though to join up if you would like to. I've brought the price right down this year because I just wanted to make it more accessible to as many people as possible. This is independent school focused, I'm afraid, but if there's demand there from state school colleagues, I'd be very willing to look at that as well. That's a rundown of the programme. The first 4 sessions are online, and the final session will be in person. So yeah, do have a look at that if that's something that you'd be interested in. And I'll finish with these wise words from the wonderful partnerpreneur colleague that many of us know, that relationships cost very little, and they are what underpins good partnership working. So even if you haven't got a big budget, even if you haven't got any budget, if you've just got a little bit of time to meet up with your counterpart in another school and sit down, have a cup of tea together, you just never know what might emerge from that. So if you've got any questions, I would be really happy to take them. I've just stuck a QR code there because, you know, this is a free webinar, but if you found it useful today, I would invite you to make a contribution there.